The flame licked the bottom of the clay pot, yet the pot remained cold. Stone cold. Like the silence that had settled between Ngozi and her husband for the past 30 years. The pot had been in Ngozi's family for generations. Her mother had cooked in it, her grandmother before that. But tonight, as Ngozi prepared dinner for her children who had finally come home, something was terribly wrong. The pot refused to heat. Ngozi and Uncle Jide had lived in their Abuja estate for decades. High walls surrounded manicured gardens, but inside, the house felt empty. They shared a bed, a dining table, and a last name, but they might as well have been strangers. Ngozi had once been fierce in the corporate world. She had built companies, led teams, and raised 2 children while climbing every ladder she encountered. But now, in retirement, she found herself lost. Every morning, she would stand in her kitchen, staring at the old clay pot she never used anymore. They called it the Pot of Secrets. Nobody remembered how it got that name, but nobody dared question it either. Uncle Jide was different. He had aged like palm wine, sweet at first taste, but sour if left unattended. He read his newspapers, drank his tea exactly as he had for 20 years, and barely spoke unless spoken to. The man had perfected the art of being present while being absent. Everything changed when the children returned home. Adaora arrived first, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had lost weight, but her expensive clothes hid it well. Everyone thought she was successful in Lagos, a young lawyer with a perfect marriage. Nobody knew about the divorce papers she kept in her purse. Chuka came next, pulling up in his latest car. He worked in tech, dated often, but committed to nothing. Marriage was a word he avoided like a bad investment. Ngozi welcomed them with open arms. My children, finally, some life in this house. But life wasn't what they brought. They brought ghosts. The ghosts of words never spoken, of emotions never shared, of a childhood ruled by discipline rather than warmth. That evening, as Ngozi prepared a traditional meal, she reached for the old clay pot. She placed it on the gas stove, turned on the flame, and waited. Nothing happened. The fire burned bright, but the pot stayed cold. "Chuka," she called out. "Is this gas working properly?" Her son checked. "Yes, Mama. Everything's fine." She touched the pot again, cold as ice. Adaora joined them, placing her hand on the pot. She pulled back, confused. "Maybe the pot is tired, Mama." Uncle Jide looked up from his newspaper for the first time all evening. "Or maybe," he said quietly, "it remembers things you've forgotten." The room fell silent. "Is the pot cursed?" asked David, the security guard's son, who often helped around the house. Everyone laughed, but something inside Ngozi cracked. That night, she sat alone in the kitchen, watching the pot that wouldn't boil, as memories she had buried began to surface. Rain tapped gently on the roof as Ngozi sat in the dark kitchen. The pot stood before her like a judge, waiting for a confession. Uncle Jide entered without his usual newspaper or tea, just him and his quiet presence. "Still keeping secrets from that pot?" he asked. Ngozi remembered something her mother had said years ago. "This pot only boils when the house is honest." She had laughed then. What kind of nonsense was that? But now, decades later, the words felt like prophecy. "Jide," she said, turning to her husband, "why didn't you ever ask why I raised the children the way I did?" He sat beside her, something unusual flickering in his eyes. "Because I was afraid you'd leave me with them if I disagreed." Her mouth fell open. All these years, she had thought him passive, disconnected, but he had been surviving, hiding his fear behind newspapers and silence. "You let me become the lion while you hid in your cave," she whispered. and you never let anyone come close enough to see your wounds," he replied. They sat in the heavy silence until Ngozi asked what had been haunting her. "Did you know Adora is divorced?" He nodded. "I knew the moment she hugged you like a stranger." "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because you taught her to only bring victories home." The truth hit Ngozi like a wave. She stood up suddenly, and as she did, something incredible happened. The pot began to heat. The water inside started to shiver, then boil. "Jide," she gasped. He smiled softly. "Seems the pot forgives truth." In the living room, Chuka and Adora sat sipping malt, avoiding each other's eyes. "You didn't tell them?" Chuka asked. "No. And you? Still pretending you don't want love?" Chuka chuckled bitterly. "I watched our parents' marriage like it was a war film. Why would I sign up for that?" "But what if they were just tired soldiers?" Adora asked, "fighting a war they didn't start." Her brother turned to look at her. "When did you become so deep?" "When I lost everything and had to start telling myself the truth." That night, something shifted in the house. The walls that had held secrets for so long began to crumble. The next morning, Ngozi called everyone to the living room. The clay pot sat proudly on the center table, steam rising from it for the first time in years. "Children," she began, "I made mistakes. I raised you the only way I knew, through discipline, silence, and expectations. But I realize now, I forgot to raise your hearts." Adora's eyes glistened. Chuka shifted uncomfortably. "We all have secrets, Mama," Chuka said finally. He pulled out a letter. "I'm resigning from my job. I want to start something new, something for families like ours. Counseling, support, honest conversations." Ngozi blinked in shock. Her son, who had always avoided messy emotions, had found a calling. "Let this pot boil for others too," she whispered. A week later, the pot had taken on new meaning. It sat in the living room like a family member, no longer cooking food, but warming hearts. Adora had started something she called Therapy with Fire. Every morning she wrote letters to her younger self and burned them in the backyard. One day, Ngozi found her. "I used to write letters like that," Ngozi said, "to my own mother. She never read them." Adora offered her a lighter. "Maybe we'll write them together." Chuka's project, the family bench, was simple but powerful. Wooden benches placed around Abuja, where strangers could sit, talk, or cry without shame. No fancy branding, just connection. And Uncle Jid? He bought a new kettle, a loud one. Now he made tea for everyone each morning, becoming the conversation starter instead of the silent observer. One rainy Saturday, as the family played cards, Mrs. Okon, their nosy neighbor, knocked on the door. "You people are still boiling that thing?" she asked, pointing at the pot. They all laughed. "Come in, Auntie," Chuka called. "We're playing hot." And what will the pot say if I win?" Adora smiled. "It will say you were honest enough to join us." Months later, the pot stopped boiling altogether. Not because it was broken, but because its work was done. Ngozi placed it in a glass case at her new counseling center with a plaque beneath it. The pot that only boiled when truth was served. Visitors would stare at it, some confused, some emotional, some curious. Above it, another plaque read, "If your marriage is too quiet, speak. If your parenting is too loud, listen. Let this pot remind you that some homes feed the stomach, but the best homes feed the soul." The counseling center opened on a morning that felt like a blessing. Sunlight poured through the windows, making the pot's plaque shimmer. Ngozi stood at the entrance in soft blue, her face lighter than it had been in decades. Uncle Jide stood beside her, handing out cups of tea to every guest like it was communion. Chuka directed volunteers with calm focus, while Adora arranged chairs. laughing with children. Divorce hadn't made her smaller. It had made her real. People came from all over. Couples holding hands tightly or barely speaking. Families broken by silence. Children carrying burdens too heavy for their age. One woman cried the moment she saw the pot. Nobody asked why. Everyone understood that some pots don't boil because they are empty of truth. That afternoon, the first family bench meeting began. A couple on the brink of separation shared their story. A teenage girl spoke about her father's anger. An old man admitted he had never said, "I'm sorry," in 42 years of marriage. And the pot, though no longer cooking, seemed to listen. Ngozi sat quietly beside her husband and whispered, "We could have ended in silence." He smiled, "But we chose to speak." She nodded, and the pot chose to remember us well. They held hands, two people no longer fighting to win, but to heal. From that day forward, the legacy of their home changed. From a house of unspoken expectations to a place where truth had room to boil. And so, in the heart of Abuja, a simple clay pot became a symbol of something greater. It reminded everyone who saw it that the most important meals we serve aren't always the ones we eat. They're the ones we share through our stories, our apologies, and the fires we keep alive with honesty. Some homes feed the stomach, some homes feed the lie, but the best homes feed the soul. And sometimes, all it takes is a pot that refuses to boil until the truth is finally served. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more exciting stories from the heart of Africa.